Have you ever felt like your life was leading you down the wrong path? That one decision you made, the one that seemed so harmless at the time? What if I told you that choice, one you might think is so small, could haunt you in ways you couldn't even begin to imagine? Imagine this. What if you didn't just pick the wrong career, but you picked the wrong life entirely? This is the story of a man, just like any other, who thought he had found his true passion. He thought that by picking up a camera, he was capturing beauty, life, his dreams. But little did he know, the moment he picked up that camera, he also picked up something else. Something terrifying. Meet our protagonist, a man whose life seemed as ordinary as the job he'd found himself stuck in. His story begins in a place many of us know too well: retail. What started as a simple part-time cashier job at Target, something anyone could pick up to make ends meet, turned into a full-time existence. And that's where the problem began. What was once a temporary position became his whole life. He had no dreams, no passions, or at least, that's what he told himself. Day after day, the same routine. He'd clock in, stock shelves, ring up customers, and clock out, only to start the cycle over again. The faces would change, the tasks would shift, but the feeling of being stuck never did. He was quiet, unremarkable, a man who blended into the background. The kind of person no one would notice unless they needed something, and even then, he was just another face behind the register. To the outside world, he was just like everyone else, living a life full of the usual noise and bustle. But to him, there was always a gnawing feeling in the back of his mind, a realization that he was wasting time, that he was treading water in a sea of monotony. He didn't know it then, but his frustration was the first crack in the facade of his otherwise predictable life. The long shifts, the constant rush, the blandness of it all, it was wearing him down. Yet, despite this, there was no way out. No easy escape. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant for something else, something bigger than this. But as the days turned to weeks and the weeks into months, the idea of escaping became more and more distant. This wasn't the life he wanted, but it was the one he had. And it felt like it was swallowing him whole. It wasn't until one fateful day that everything changed. He had worked countless hours in the same routine, dealing with the same customers, the same complaints, and the same mundane tasks. But that day, something felt different. She walked into the store, and it was as if the world around him faded into the background. Her name was Jess, and she was a woman with the kind of beauty that could stop traffic. Not just the kind of beauty you notice in passing, but the kind that demands your attention, the kind that makes your heart race without warning. She was striking: tan skin, dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders, and a presence that seemed to draw all the light in the room toward her. She moved with confidence, as if she knew exactly the effect she had on everyone around her. But it wasn't her appearance alone that captured his attention. It was the way she carried herself, the way her eyes seemed to scan the room like she was searching for something, someone. The moment she approached the service desk, it was clear she wasn't just another customer. She was something else. She wanted to return some lingerie, but without a receipt. Typical, he thought. Another scammer trying to pull a fast one. But this time, he wasn't annoyed. He wasn't irritated. Something about her made him forget everything. The rules, the policies, even his usual patience. Was it her beauty? Or was it something darker, something that tugged at his instincts, making him drop his guard in a way he hadn't done before? She smiled, and that smile, it wasn't just warm. It was knowing, as if she could read his every thought with a glance. Her gaze locked with his as she leaned over the counter just enough to make him feel suddenly very aware of her presence, of her closeness. "I just need to return these," she said, her voice a soft melody that made the ordinary store feel like something entirely different. He felt the blood rush to his face, and for the briefest moment, it was like the whole world had narrowed down to just the two of them. She wasn't like the other customers who came in and out of his life. Jess was different. There was something about the way she carried herself, something almost too calculated, like she knew exactly how to get under his skin, how to make him bend the rules without him even realizing it. It wasn't just the way she looked at him, it was the way she made him feel. He quickly processed the return, his hands trembling just slightly as he handed her the receipt. She smiled again, but it wasn't just a smile of gratitude. It was a smile that hinted at something more, something far more unsettling. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Thanks for your help," she said with a wink, before walking out the door, her presence lingering long after she was gone. He stood there for a moment, staring at the door as if expecting her to walk back in, expecting her to continue the conversation. But she didn't. She was gone. And yet, in the quiet aftermath, something about that encounter gnawed at him. Was it just her beauty, or was there something else about her that made him feel as if he had just stepped into something much darker? Something that was impossible to ignore? That was the moment everything changed. Jess had just walked into his life, and he had no idea how deep he was about to get pulled into her world. From that day forward, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Her image lingered in his mind, like a shadow that refused to leave. Every moment, every passing second, it was as if she was still there. Her smile, her eyes, her presence burned into his thoughts. He'd always been a quiet observer, the kind of person who appreciated the world from behind the lens of a camera. It was his escape, his way of seeing beauty without ever truly being a part of it. But now, everything was different. He no longer saw the world the way he once had. Every sunset, every tree, every fleeting moment now seemed more vivid, more alive, more beautiful. But it wasn't just the world that caught his attention, it was her. He started carrying his camera everywhere. He took photos of everyday life, capturing the mundane in ways he never had before. The wind rustling through the trees, the soft glow of the setting sun, it all felt magical, enhanced by the thoughts of her. But as time passed, it wasn't just the world around him he wanted to capture. He began noticing her everywhere, at the park, walking down the street, even in the background of photos he'd taken without realizing it. And so, he began to follow her. Without her knowing, of course. His camera became his constant companion, clicking away at moments where she appeared, just as if by chance. He told himself it was innocent, that he was just capturing the world, the beauty of life. But with every click of the shutter, something dark was growing inside him. The soft click of the camera became the rhythm of his obsession, each photo another piece of the puzzle he was creating in his mind. His heart raced with every shot, every new image that felt more like a haunting than an image of beauty. Jess was there, in every frame. Always just out of reach. And yet, somehow, always closer than he had ever intended her to be. Then, one day, fate took another turn. He was at Starbucks, lost in the usual hum of the coffee shop, when he saw her again, Jess. This time, though, it wasn't just another casual glance. She spotted him first, her eyes locking onto his from across the room. A smile spread across her face, and before he could even gather his thoughts, she was making her way over to him. She approached with that same confidence, the kind of easy grace that made it impossible for anyone not to notice her. "Hey, aren't you the guy from Target?" she said, her voice warm and inviting, as if they were old friends. His heart skipped a beat. She remembered him. He laughed nervously, trying to hide the rising panic in his chest. "Oh yeah, that was me." Before he could say anything else, she surprised him. Without a moment's hesitation, she reached forward and gave him a tight hug. It wasn't just a friendly hug, it was intimate, like she had been waiting for this moment, like she had been pulling him into her orbit the whole time. When she pulled back, she flashed him a flirtatious smile, her lips curving into something that made him both nervous and captivated. She leaned in just slightly, her voice dropping to a softer tone. "Thanks again for helping me with that return. I got the new set," she said, pulling down the collar of her shirt just enough to reveal a purple bra. The gesture was casual, but something about it made his stomach twist in a way he couldn't quite explain. A wave of unease washed over him. Was it the intimacy of the gesture, the boldness, or the fact that she seemed completely unaffected by his reaction? He couldn't stop thinking about her now. Every moment of every day, her face lingered in his mind. And Jess? She didn't seem to mind at all. She didn't notice his discomfort, or if she did, she simply didn't care. To her, it was just another game, a game he hadn't even realized he was playing. And yet, somehow, the rules were already being written, whether he wanted to play or not. At the grocery store, walking down the street, sitting in the background of a crowd, Jess was everywhere. The more he captured, the more he couldn't escape her. He thought he was just documenting life, but now, it was as if his camera had become a window into her world, a world he couldn't break into. It was as if she was drawn to him, or worse, he was drawn to her. The line between fascination and obsession blurred. Every time he saw her in his photos, he couldn't help but feel that strange magnetic pull, like she was meant to be there. And yet, it was more than just a simple attraction. It felt wrong. The photos weren't just capturing moments, they were capturing something else. The unsettling thought crept in. Was she following him? Or was he following her? One night, everything changed. He'd been planning the shot for days. The perfect photograph of the supermoon rising over a set of train tracks. It was an ordinary scene, one he had captured countless times before. But tonight, it was supposed to be different. The moon was bigger, brighter than ever before, and the sky was clear, almost eerie in its stillness. He knew this was the moment he'd been waiting for. He clicked the camera, excited to see the perfect shot unfold in front of him. The moon hung in the sky like a massive glowing eye, illuminating the tracks and the surrounding pines. He thought nothing could ruin the moment, until he checked the pictures. The first photo was perfect, just as he had hoped. But when he scrolled to the next shot, something was wrong. There she was. She was standing in the middle of the train tracks, perfectly framed by the shot. His breath caught in his throat. There was no way she could have been there. The area was remote, desolate, completely void of life. He had been alone when he took the shot. He had checked. But there she was, standing in the tracks, looking at him as though she had been waiting for this very moment. Her presence was too real, too vivid, to be just a coincidence. He flicked through the rest of the photos, his hands trembling as the truth settled over him like a suffocating weight. Each picture was more disturbing than the last. Jess wasn't just standing there, she was entwined with a man, kissing him, her hands running over his body. And then, in the next photo, the man was gone, his body lying lifeless on the ground, covered in strange white creatures crawling over him. But Jess, she remained, smiling unervingly at the camera, her eyes now locked onto him. His stomach twisted. He felt sick. His camera was supposed to capture beauty, moments frozen in time, but this was something else. It wasn't just a picture. It was a message. Something was terribly wrong. Jess had never been anywhere near the location. But somehow, she was in every shot. The photos were emptying him of his sanity, and he didn't know how to escape from this nightmare. How had she gotten there? How was it even possible? The photos kept getting stranger, each one sinking deeper into something he couldn't explain. At first, he tried to convince himself it was just a coincidence, just his mind playing tricks. But as he flipped through the images, the truth became undeniable. In one, Jess was entwined with a man, her body pressed against his, as if they were caught in some kind of dance. But something about it felt wrong, too intimate, too calculated. Their eyes weren't looking at each other, they were looking at the camera, and it was as if they knew someone was watching. But he hadn't been there. How could they know? Then came the next photo. His heart skipped a beat when he saw it. Jess was staring directly at him, her cold, soul-piercing eyes locked into the lens. It was as if she wasn't just in the picture. She was looking through it, into him. Her gaze felt unnatural, as if she could see every secret he'd ever hidden, every dark thought he had buried deep inside. The next image twisted everything even further. The man was gone, replaced by something much worse. His body lay on the ground, lifeless, surrounded by a swarm of white, writhing creatures. The grotesque things were crawling over him, their tiny bodies moving in a sickening, unnatural way. But what made his stomach turn wasn't the creatures, it was Jess. There she was, sitting calmly on the ground next to the body, her hands folded in her lap, smiling in a way that wasn't right. Her smile was wide, almost too wide, and her eyes glinted with something dark, something hungry. She looked pleased. The longer he stared at the photo, the more it felt like she was right there with him, watching him through the screen. A cold shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't just a picture. This was a message. A warning. The final straw came when the photos turned blank. The creepy, unsettling images of Jess, the man, and the creatures, the ones that had been haunting him, disappeared. Every shot he had taken, every horrifying scene that had unfolded in front of his camera, was gone. His gallery was empty, wiped clean, as if they had never existed at all. His hands shook as he flipped through the photos, growing more frantic with each empty frame. Then, in the last photo, something different appeared. The image was crystal clear, but it wasn't one he had taken. It wasn't something he remembered snapping. There, on the screen, was Jess. But she wasn't in the background of some random street or park anymore. No, this time, she was sitting outside his window, on his lawn. He froze, his breath caught in his chest. He didn't know how long he stood there staring at the image, trying to convince himself that it was some kind of mistake. But it wasn't. Jess was staring directly at the camera. No, directly at him. Her eyes pierced through the photo as if they were focused on him in that very moment, as if she could see him through the lens of the camera, through the screen itself. His pulse quickened. His skin prickled with a cold sweat as he turned, slowly, toward the window. There she was, sitting on his lawn, just as in the photo. The same intense, unnerving stare. A smile tugged at her lips, a smile that wasn't friendly, wasn't warm. It was something darker, something that made his blood run cold. She wasn't just a figure in his photos anymore. She was right outside, watching him, as though she had always been there, waiting for him to notice. And now, he realized, there was no escaping her. No more running. She was here. And she had been watching him all along. But that wasn't the worst part. As he stared back at her, a horrifying truth hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't been the one taking the photos all along. She had been the one behind the camera. All this time, Jess had been the one documenting every moment, every encounter, every chilling image. And now she was waiting for him to make the next move. He stood frozen in place, his heart pounding, his mind racing. How had he not seen it? How had he not noticed the way the photo shifted, the way she appeared in every frame, always just a little closer, a little more real? She wasn't a figure to be observed from behind the lens anymore. She was a force, a presence that had been toying with him, stalking him from the shadows. As his eyes met hers again, her gaze unwavering, something shifted in the air. It was as if time itself had slowed. The wind seemed to hush. The world felt still, as if holding its breath. And then, from the silence, a whisper broke through the tension. "You chose the wrong profession." The words hung in the air like a dark omen, a warning he couldn't ignore. He tried to speak, to move, but his body refused to obey. He was trapped in her gaze, paralyzed by the realization that he was no longer in control. With a final chilling glance, she leaned back, as though expecting him to do something, anything. And with that, the darkness took over. What would you do if someone was haunting you through your own photos? Have you ever felt like something, or someone, was watching you, following you without you knowing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know how you'd react in a situation like this. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more creepy stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The darkness never truly leaves. Until next time, keep your cameras close, and your eyes even closer.